If I was to ask you what's a very famous former tractor manufacturer from the UK and James Bond have in common, would you know? Well, if you stick around for the next 15 minutes, you're going to find out. Good evening, everybody. You're very welcome back to the Agri-Motive Farm Machinery YouTube channel. So this week's episode is all about David Brown. So David Brown, who he was, where the company came from, and how it was formed. So we have to go back to the start. We have to go back to 1860 when the David Brown Engineering Company was founded, and they mainly specialised in the making of gears and gearboxes, cutting gears. Gear systems, transmissions parts, shafts, bearings, all that kind of stuff. And in 1902, it moved to their site in Huddersfield. So the original David Brown died in 1903, and his two sons, Frank and Percy, took over the business, which was to become the David Brown and Sons business. So, as I said, they were in the business of gear units, cutting machines, bearings, shafts, and worm gears for gearboxes, any type of industrial applications, especially for the British military as well. So you're coming into the time of World War One then, so there was a lot of manufacturing for military equipment, and anyone that was specialised in that sort of stuff, really, their business was about to take off. So they also had a foundry as well. So they had a foundry for making castings for motor vehicles, and a lot of this as well went to the war effort, aircrafts and ships and things like that. They made parts for. So in 1904, Frank had his first son, and his first son was called David. Now, this is the David that we've all come to know down through the years from the David Brown tractor business, I suppose, and amongst other things. So, yeah, who was he? So the young David was born in Huddersfield in Yorkshire to his father Frank and to Caroline. Now, he left school at the age of 17 to start work as an apprentice machinist in his grandfather's business. So he would cycle 6 to 7 miles every morning from his house to the factory to start work at 7:30. It's not something that you get a lot of kids to do these days, and that's for sure. So yeah, David's father, Frank, he didn't have much interest in cars, so he was just sort of business centered around what was happening in the business, the gearboxes, gearing, all that kind of stuff that the company was involved in. But his mother, actually, she was the one. She had a good interest in cars and the like, motorcycles and stuff, and this is what sparked young David's passion for cars. So she'd often take him out driving in the first David Brown car that was actually built was called a DBS. So this was a valveless. I think it was a valveless engine. So they built the engines in that form. When the car was on test, young David would go for a drive around the countryside with the engineers, with his mother, and he learned to drive at 11 years of age. So yeah, as time went on, young David's father offered to buy him a motorcycle to get to work in the mornings and that, and to help with his travel. So young David, I suppose, took a little bit of advantage of his father's ignorance towards engines and machinery and motorcycles. He really didn't know much about them, so he talked his father into buying him a 1000cc V-twin Reading standard motorcycle, which was quite a powerful bike at the time. So young David then went on to modify the engine, tweak a few little bits and pieces, and made it quite powerful. And he took part in several hill climbs and motorcycle races, and he actually won quite a lot in it. And he was invited actually by the Douglas Motor Company to go as a works driver for the Isle of Man TT races one year. I'm not sure exactly what year it was, but he was invited to go. He was that good. He was invited to go and take part in the Isle of Man TT races. And actually, on the day of testing, his father put a stop to the whole thing and forbade young David of taking part. So that's just a little bit of information. So yeah, that's, I suppose, set the groundwork for what was to come and down through the years, when you see the mind that he had even at that young age to develop his own engines, to be able to modify them and to modify chassis and stuff like that. So moving on to 1922, then David, as a young lad, he would have been probably 1920. He was sent to South Africa. David Brown Company, whatever, had set up a factory in South Africa, and I think, from all accounts, there was some issues with the manager down there. He was a little bit too fond of the gargle. So young David was sent down to keep an eye on things down there, on his father's behalf. But I also believe that young David was very, fond of a girl back in the UK, and it was also a way of getting him away from her, because I don't know, the father didn't approve of the pair, so he sent him off to South Africa for a couple of years, hoping that it would split them up, and he could learn some stuff down there and keep an eye on the factory at the same time. So yeah, on return from South Africa, then David set about working very hard, actually, at building his own car. So he'd work late at night, often till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, designed the chassis, designed the engine. He actually designed a 1.5 twin cam straight 8 engine, made the cast for it for the block, done all the machining. But again, when his father found out what he was doing on company time and company money, he actually put a stop to it. But young David wasn't deterred, so he went on, carried on, built his chassis. He got an engine for it, I think, a Sage 2-litre engine, and he married it to a Meadows gearbox. Built his car together and called it the Dabo. So David Brown, first car that young David Brown built, he called it the Dabo. Now, I don't think this car ever went into manufacture, but it was just one of his little pet projects. But as you can see, he had that engineer in mind. He wanted to make things. He wanted to make cars, and by all accounts, he was a genius at it. So moving on then to 1928, he was sent to the US and to Africa and all around Europe, to different factories and different businesses, to learn some business methods, and to learn about factory management. So this was all, setting him up to becoming a director of their own company in the future. And in 1929, he was made director after his uncle Percy had died. And in 1931, then he was made a joint director along with his father. And in 1933, he was made managing director. So he very quickly moved up the ranks within the business. Yeah, so then in 1939, under his control, they acquired a site at Meltham in West Yorkshire, and they started the Ferguson Brown Company. So he went into partnership with Harry Ferguson to make tractors. Now, they made, I don't know, I think it was around 1,500, 1,700 tractors together, but their partnership broke down when they did have engineering differences between them. So David Brown actually took upon it himself during their partnership to make a tractor in private, in secret, from Harry Ferguson, and he called it VAC 1. So when the partnership broke down, the VAC 1 was built and was ready to go. So it actually was very successful, and they ended up making, I think, near 8,000, 7,700, something like that, of the VAC 1 tractors. Jumping on then, I suppose, to 1946, and this was his first venture into the world of motor cars proper. So yeah, Brown saw an advertisement for an upcoming sports car company, whatever. The company was advertised for £30,000. It doesn't sound a whole lot to us now for a company. I suppose back then it probably would have been quite a bit of money, but I suppose not outrageous. This company was Aston Martin. It had only developed one car at the time. It had called the Atom. So the company was bought. He agreed to purchase the company for 20,500. So he got it at a bargain. So when the purchase began, work on the Atom, then he wanted to put this car into production. He changed the chassis, the design of it, he wanted to change around. So he changed the chassis, he made it a soft top. He preferred soft top, so he needed to change the design of the chassis. The engine on it wasn't just to his liking, so he got a few more horsepower out of it. Got the car just the way he liked. And this car went into production, now famously known as the Aston Martin DB1. So there's your DB, that's where DB comes from. And for anyone that doesn't know, the Aston Martin DB 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Aston Martin David Brown 1. So yeah, James Bond obviously is a huge fan of Aston Martin, and in particular the DB3 is probably my favourite. Is fantastic looking car. So yeah, that's where DB comes from in Aston Martin. So he acquired the Aston Martin company. Car went into production as the DB1. Later on, then a few years later, I think 1947 or 8, the Lagonda company came up for sale. Now Lagonda were sort of a fledgling sort of engineering car manufacturing outfit. This company went for sale. I think he bought it for something like 52,000. He bought not so much the premises, I think, but the rights around the machine, the car itself, and it's one of its engineers, which was the famous Bentley, had developed this 2.5 litre 6-cylinder engine. So he now owned the rights to that engine, and he really wanted that engine for his Aston Martins. So a couple of years later, into production goes the DB2 with this Bentley designed engine, 2.5 6-cylinder engine, which was a very, 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 very famous engine, very popular within that car at the time, and it gave him the horsepower and the performance that he was looking for out of his sports car. So in 1955, then they went on to build coach builders in Tickford coach builders, yeah, and they moved Aston Martin and Lagonda into their premises in Newport Pagnell, and that's where the manufacturing of the Aston Martin and that began proper. So in 1972, then David Brown, the corporation itself, went into financial difficulty, and they subsequently sold the division, the tractor division, to Tenneco International, and Aston Martin to a separate buyer. So the tractor company was now gone out of David Brown's hands, although the name did remain for several years. The Aston Martin end of things, the David Brown designation was dropped for a couple of years until in 1993 when Ford bought Aston Martin back and they developed the DB7. So they reinstated the name DB with the DB7. So there was a big break in between the DB6, which would have been in the 70s, I think, to the DB7, which was in the 90s. Tenneco then went on to buy the tractor end of things. Now, anyone that doesn't know Tenneco would have owned at the time Case and Internet. They're a huge American company. They own Case and International Harvesters. So that's where the shift then came, I suppose, from Case to Case International to your Case David Brown connection in the UK. So yeah, Tenneco went on to own David Brown. They bought it for the foothold in the UK and I suppose the European market. In 1983, the David Brown name disappeared with the launch of the 94 series, which was now carrying the name Case International. So that was pretty much the end of the road for David Brown as a tractor manufacturer. Now, they had a fantastic few years all through the 50s, starting with the 30Ds and then up through the 600s, the 700s, 800s, the 900 series. They're all fantastic tractors. I know my mother's brothers and my grandfather and that would have all had David Brown tractors, and they still do. My cousin has restored one of them at the minute, his father's old tractor. And I would have gone over to visit them at the weekend, and they would have had their David Browns, and sure, I was a John Deere snob and I didn't think much of their David Browns at the time, but now I have a different sort of respect for them, I suppose. when you look back over the history of the company and that, and how it was formed, how it started. And they are a fantastic tractor. They're a collector's item now, like most of them. My grandfather on my dad's side, he would have had older ones again than 30D. So that would have been from the 1950s. So he had a 30D, and it lay in the hay barn at home in my grandmother's up until the 1990s. I think probably early 90, maybe 92, 93 when it was bought by a local dealer. I was working with the dealer at the time, and I remember going over and getting the 30D out of the shed. We put it on a trailer. We brought it over to the garage where we're working, and it started. I think we got it started within about 2 hours. Just lubing up things, putting fresh diesel in it, freeing up bits and pieces on it, and bleeding out the system. And there was a compression system on it that you could knock the compression off, get it swinging over, and then switch on the compression, and she'd fire up. And it did fire up quite easily, actually, from what I remember. And that tractor went on to be restored. So yeah, I have a little bit of history. I've never really driven many David Brown tractors down through the years, but I have a little bit of history with them through my family, and I would like to someday get my hands on one to do a job on an old 30D or something. I would love something like that. So yeah, that was really it. I suppose in 1968. Then David Brown, he was Sir David Brown. He was knighted for his services to industry. In 1990, then he sold his shares in David Brown for, I think it was nearly 50 million, if I remember, 50 million pound. And he died in 3 years later, actually, in when he was retired. He was living in Monte Carlo, so he died in 1993. So that's just a little bit about the man himself that was David Brown. I'm sure there are plenty of people looking at this video that have David Brown or have had David Brown tractors that have came from that factory in Meltham in West Yorkshire down through the years. If anybody has anything that they'd like to share, if you worked for David Brown, if you work for, Case International through that David Brown period, drop us a message in the comments if you have any more information that you'd like to pass on. If there's anything that I missed you think was relevant that should be added in, or if there's anything that I said that was wrong, because I'm only just doing a little bit of research. I'm no historian, and that's for sure. But yeah, a great company, and it seems like he was a very good engineer and designer, and really built a fantastic company whose name still lives on today. Actually, the David Brown name actually still lives on today in different companies around the world. So that's it. Yeah, if you like the video, drop a comment, give us a like, share with a friend that you think might like it. Every comment, every like, every share helps this channel within the YouTube algorithm. So any support or assistance you can give me, I'd really appreciate it. So until the weekend, we'll see you all, and take care.